In this video, we'll be continuing talking about the immune system, looking specifically at the adaptive defenses or adaptive immune system, or sometimes you've heard it called the specific immune system. If you've had my AP Bio class, that's what I called in there. All the same thing. The idea that the immune system adapts to the things that it's being uh, shown by the outside world. And so we're going to talk kind of the basics of this today, and then we're going to break down the individual parts of it in future videos. So first of all, the adaptive immune response is a specific defense that eliminates almost any pathogen or abnormal cell from the body. Pathogens, again, are disease-causing agents. An abnormal cell could just be anything that's not you, that shouldn't be there, that is. And the activities of this are to just amplify the inflammatory response. And so not only is it taking out specific things, but it also amplifies the body's innate defenses, and it acts as a complement to that. And the problem with it, of course, is it's very efficient, but it takes time. So the first particular time that you come in contact with something, it has to be primed, so to speak, and this can take time. And we typically have that's what we think about when we think of an illness or the symptoms of an illness, is that time when our bodies are dealing with that illness. So some characteristics of not yet some characteristics of adaptive immunity is that it's specific. It recognizes and targets specific antigens. So it is going against a specific thing as opposed to the innate defenses, which just generally attack everything. These target specific problems. It's systemic, meaning that it is all over the body. It is not restricted to an initial site. So, like you step on a nail, you have an inflammatory response in that site. This adaptive immunity is systemic, meaning it's throughout the whole body. And it also has a memory, meaning that if you come in contact with that same antigen again, we'll talk about what antigens are in just a moment. If you come in contact with that same antigen again, you will have a second exposure to it, and that second exposure will actually be stronger in that your immune system will react stronger and you will have less symptoms associated with that. There are two main branches associated with the adaptive immune response: the humoral immunity and cellular immunity, or sometimes it's called cell mediated immunity. Both of those are correct. One of my students suggested that I fill up some of the blank spots in my PowerPoints with more pictures. And so I found another picture to put in that blank spot. Thank you for the suggestion. So a couple things here. Actually, we'll move on. No, we won't. I'm going to just generally define these, and then each one of these humoral response and cellular response are going to get a specific video. Humoral immunity deals with the production of antibodies, and again, we'll talk more about antibodies in a later video. These antibodies are produced by B cells, and their whole idea is you can see this picture here. The antibodies are these little tripod-looking things, and they attach themselves to the bad guy and basically flag them for destruction. Whereas cellular immunity or cell-mediated response is where the cells themselves go out and deal with either by killing infected cells or by releasing chemicals to again complement the inflammatory response and get that to happen. So, what is an antigen? Well, an antigen is a substance that basically causes your immune system to be provoked. And so, here's a bacterial cell, and a bacteria cell is a bad thing as far as our body's concerned. Well, certain kinds of bacteria are bad, certain are good. This is a bad one, pretend. And you can see that it has some components of its cell wall, and your body will recognize those components of cell walls as not you, as something bad. And so we would call that something an antigen, because as soon as your body recognizes it, it will go out and then deal with it. Think of the word antigen, opposite, and gen is generate. It's generating a response against that thing that's not you. All right, and this is the general target of any adaptive immune response. They can usually be they're usually something like a protein. It could be something else that could be an antigen as well. One more thing before I go to that one are these ideas of antigenic determinants. An antigenic determinant are parts of the antigen that the antibodies or the lymphocytes or whatever is dealing with it binds to. So you can see here these little bits here. This would be like the piece that your cell recognizes and binds to that. So these antibodies are binding to the cell, and they do that with those antigenic determinants. That's a term that you'll see, and just understand that an antigenic determinant is a part of an antigen. All right. Now we have things called self-antigens, and these are called MHC proteins. MHC stands for major histocompatibility complex. So you're free to write MHC instead of that. Just know that if you see major histocompatibility complex, it is talking about this thing called an MHC protein. An MHC protein is a way of you identifying yourself. You could even call them self antigens, or like it says in this picture, a self marker. All of your cells are covered with these kinds of proteins, and basically, it allows your body to recognize itself and not have an immune response against itself. It makes sense. All right, and all of your cells have these kinds of MHC proteins. We'll talk more about them when we talk about cellular immunity and how they work. And then lymphocytes and antigen presenting cells, we'll get to that in a second. So, just a couple things. When I talk about lymphocytes, it's a general term, but it could be either a T lymphocyte or a B lymphocyte. We'll just call them T cells and B cells. B cells are typically associated with humoral immunity. T cells are typically associated with cellular immunity. There is a T cell that we'll talk about that deals with kind of both of them, and it's kind of over all of them. But in general, think B cells humoral and T cells cellular immunity. And don't worry about this natural killer cell over here. It's a type of T cell too. Okay, and then there are antigen presenting cells or APCs, and they tell you what they do. These are cells that basically go around and eat crap in your body, and then they present that antigen as a way for your body to say that's something that we should form an immune response against. All right. They don't respond to specific antigens, they go around and just eat everything. And so they kind of play a part of in your innate immunity as well as the specific response. They're not going out and looking for anything in specific necessarily. They're just eating everything, and then they present that antigen to another type of cell, which in this case you see down there, that helper T cell, presenting it to that. Or it could go around and eat things that are marked in other ways, like something that's marked with antibodies, which again, we'll get into that. The most common type of antigen presenting cells are the ones we've talked about, like macrophages, but then specific parts of the body, like the skin. Remember, we talked about dendritic cells a long time ago. That would be an example of a cell that is specific to a spot in the body, but does basically the same work.